Illinois Democrats will choose between Joe and Bernie on March 17th, and some top politicians pick sides. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. We are less than 2 weeks away from the Illinois primary on March 17th. And the legislature's been meeting. Lots going on. Here to talk about it with me, Sam Dunklau is back. He's a reporter with NPR Illinois here in Springfield. Hey. Welcome back, Sam.
Hey, Bernie. Thanks for having me.
And Brian Mackey, State House reporter, also for NPR Illinois. I am completely outnumbered here. Welcome back.
It's a public media heavy show. Support your public media station.
There you go. Well, as I recently found out by asking, Republican Congresspeople Rodney Davis and Darren LaHood support funding for public broadcasting, despite the fact that the president wants it zeroed out over a few years in his budget. So there you go. This has happened before, and there's a lot of, I guess, grassroots support. So
I try to remain agnostic on that issue.
Here we
as
are
a
talking,
reporter,
and actually we're on a public station, so I guess we're all in this together today. But the March 17th primary looms. Boy, have things changed fast in recent days, and I guess it's good to talk about a federal issue first because the presidential election is a biggie. Illinois has like 182, I think, Democratic delegates up for grabs. I think most of those are going to be picked by voters on Election Day. There are some who are like elected officials and people in categories like that who are party leaders. So we have had an interesting move a lot toward Joe Biden among people that we know. Jesse White, the Secretary of State, Tammy Duckworth, U.S. Senator, members of Congress, Mike Quigley, Robin Kelly, Danny Davis. On the Bernie Sanders side, Letisa Wallace, who ran for lieutenant governor, former state rep. Carol Ammons is a state rep from Champaign-Urbana. So Illinois is in play on the 17th.
Yeah, so it seems. In recent days, I mean, and it's actually interesting that it happened here on Thursday as we're taping. Federal Senator Elizabeth Warren was the latest to drop out of the Democratic presidential primary, leaving just 2 candidates remaining. It's difficult to see, Bernie, I think, how it's going to shake out in Illinois for sure. I've read some analysis that says Illinois may shake out like Minnesota and Massachusetts did on Super Tuesday, in that eventually the contests went in Joe Biden's favor. But in speaking with Governor J.B. Pritzker this past week, he indicated that what might happen, considering what happened in 2016, is that Bernie may still have a sizable margin here. He's got a lot of support, as you said, among a few state representatives. He's got a lot of support from Chicago City Council, and those wards and those
the kind of left,
the left side of
yes,
yeah, right,
new
exactly.
City Council.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and old boss Daley might not recognize some of those folks on the City Council these days.
But yet they're there, and they make up a sizable portion of City Council. So in some of these population-dense areas, Bernie could still have a lot of pockets of support. But these big endorsements that Joe Biden has gotten in recent days could certainly help turn things around and get the momentum going on March 17th. It remains to be seen. I don't think we could call it either way.
Right, and unlike the Electoral College, of course, they can split delegates. Each candidate still in the race can get some delegates, or the most, whatever, that they split them up. They don't. It's not winner take all. It's and even in each congressional district, especially the heavily Democratic ones, where more delegates are up for grabs by election, they can split them. And Brian, before we started talking on air, you mentioned how interesting it is that the ballot is going to have all kinds of people on it anyway, even if they've all dropped out.
Yeah, and I can't remember the exact phrasing. Our friend Tina Svandelis at the Sun-Times had something like ghosts on the ballot or something along those lines. I'm looking over the Board of Elections website now, still listed as active candidates as we go to air: Cory Booker, John Delaney, Michael Bennett, Mike Bloomberg, Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, Deval Patrick.
And it would be a really good test to find out how political people are if they know who all those people are.
But I think what we saw on Super Tuesday that was so interesting about this is that it seems the Stop Bernie Sanders movement, such as it is in the Democratic Party, was able to pretty quickly coalesce. So the states where there had been more early voting, and the sort of anti-Bernie votes might have been more divided between the still, as the early votes were being cast, viable candidates of Buttigieg or Klobuchar, that Sanders, I should say Biden, did not do as well. But after those two candidates threw their endorsements to Biden, among voters who were voting on election day, he did a lot better. So if that pattern holds through to Illinois, and early voting only started in Illinois this past week.
Well, actually, that's in some areas because it started about 3 weeks ago in Sangamon County.
Okay, there you go. So, okay.
Yeah,
So
there are
different
differences.
areas.
There are differences depending on the election authority. Apparently, I thought it was state law when we started in Sangamon County some time ago, but it's been going on for like a few weeks.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I stand corrected
Yeah.
then. But so yeah, maybe there are some number of votes that are already locked in Illinois, and that'll
For ghost candidates.
for ghost
That's
candidates.
right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I
And
heard
Bernie did do well here 4 years ago against
he came
Hillary
close
Clinton.
to Hillary.
He didn't defeat her, but he sort of surprised people with his strength after she seemed to be doing better. But
Yes.
it'll be interesting to see how that turns out.
Yeah, and last I saw, Lori Lightfoot, mayor of Chicago, according to Crane's Chicago Business, Greg Hines, was reporting that she was going to also endorse Biden, which, again, you don't know how much an endorsement means in all cases, but in South Carolina, it certainly meant something.
Yeah,
With James Clyburn, who was the member of Congress, who apparently half of the people in South Carolina said they considered his endorsement of Joe Biden,
Which is
when they were voting,
remarkable.
and Joe Biden was supposed to be, hoping to just at least beat Bernie there, and he crushed him, and
Right.
that led to this watershed moment and cascade into other states on Super Tuesday.
Right, exactly. And as you say, endorsements can mean a lot. I mean, in a matter of a week, we went from 5 candidates all the way down to 2, and those that dropped out threw their weight behind the candidate that they believed in, and that led to Biden's pretty sizable victory on Super Tuesday. So,
Yeah. So,
You're omitting Tulsi Gabbard, though. So, I mean,
well, there you go. I don't know.
who won? How many delegates?
she came in second to Mike Bloomberg in American Samoa.
That's
American
right.
Samoa,
I mean,
right?
this is just an incredible. I just want to pause on this though, because I think this is one of the most incredible weeks in politics that people have seen in a long time. I mean, 2016 was also incredible, but it all kind of culminated on general election night when the results were surprising to many of the prognosticators. And I think that a lot of people had written Biden's campaign off at this point as, oh well, he's tired, he missed his shot.
Poorly in Iowa, poorly in New Hampshire.
Yeah, and somebody, the John Dickerson, the CBS 60 Minutes correspondent, he does a number of podcasts, and he made the interesting point that that's the first time Biden has ever won a presidential primary.
And I
he's
remember when he
run
ran in '88.
Right.
That's right.
So, I mean, it is really a remarkable, I can't think of a more remarkable consolidation and turnaround for a candidate than we've seen in the past
And
week.
I have seen more television pundits than you saying that, which is interesting. It is. I mean, people are just. It is an amazing turnaround. So we'll see where it goes. Now, the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute in Carbondale did some polling of 1,000 registered voters, and it was something near 500 of them were likely Democratic primary voters, and that was taken in early February, February 11th to 17th. And at that time, Bernie Sanders had a slight plurality in Illinois. I think it was 22 points. Biden was just a little bit behind that. And I talked to John Shaw just after all of this now has happened and said, does a poll like that even mean anything anymore after all of these events? He says, it's a new day. You just can't take those because you don't know what it means. And obviously with all of these top politicians in Illinois, many of them for Joe Biden, things just move on. But I will now transition into another factor, another question that was asked on that Simon poll, and it had to do with the graduated income tax, which is not on the ballot on March 17th in our primary, but is, by action of the legislature last year, going to be on the ballot in November to see if Illinois drops the constitutional requirement that we have a flat income tax. Governor Pritzker wants it to be a graduated income tax. The legislature, dominated by Democrats, has already passed a bill that would set new tax rates so that, according to Pritzker, only the top 3% would pay more in taxes. Everybody else would pay the same or less. Republicans don't believe it, and some business groups don't believe it and are opposed to this change. But the poll did find there was support for graduated income tax.
It did, and I mean, I'm of two minds on this poll because there has been some criticism of it for the fact that it doesn't weight the results, which is a very common accepted thing to do.
And the Chicago Tribune story had pointed that out in the presidential results.
And I like John Jackson, the political scientist down there, and I think that,
at Southern, yeah.
Yeah, at Southern Illinois at the Paul Simon Institute, and I think that the polling has been, it's consistent with past polls on this topic, which makes me think, okay, there is some credence to it. But for example, Illinois is 51% women to 49% men. This poll was much more lopsided the other direction. 563 men, 437 women. So that's 56% male, 44% women. So it's off there, and it just makes me wonder about the overall validity, especially as you get down into individual demographics. But you're right, the overall
they do stick by their results.
They do,
and think that the polling firm that they hired which I think is a Texas firm, did it reasonably. But you're correct. There are always questions in these things.
Yeah, and it's not just the Tribune. I have heard other people sort of raise questions about why they aren't waiting over the years. But putting that aside, 65% favor the graduated income tax to 32% opposition. And I went and looked back last year when NPR Illinois had its own Illinois Issues survey out on this topic. We had found 67% support the graduated income tax. So it's pretty consistent. The Simon poll last year, 67%. The Simon poll the year before that, 67%. It's pretty much been in that anywhere from 65 to about 72% support for the graduated income tax, and it hasn't changed much over the past really 10, 12 years. However, we're about to see a lot of money spent on this issue. Governor Pritzker's dropped millions of dollars into a completely independent expenditure committee that happens to be run by one of his former top campaign aides, but it's totally independent.
But it has to be an outside group that does this,
Yes.
because you can't use government resources to tell people how to vote.
Right, and it's been interesting trying to get politicians to talk about this, because now they're all a little skittish, and particularly their staff members are, because in the past there have been communications officials in state government who have been dinged by ethics officers for, speaking out on issues that kind of verge into electioneering. It's not, vote Smith for office, but if you're saying, support the graduated income tax, well, then you are, in essence, electioneering. But that's kind of a side point. It's interesting to me that even though this is now this is no longer an abstract, what do you think about this concept? This is a thing that will be decided on next year, and voters still seem to be supporting it. And consistent with past polling, even among Republicans, there is still reasonably strong support, 41% according to the Simon poll. Now that is down. It had been around 50, and even in the past even higher than 50% support among Republican voters for this idea. And that's an interesting contrast to the legislature, where there is 0% Republican support for the graduated income tax.
And they go along with the business group.
And it bears reminding that if that polling holds true all the way through to November, that's a few percentage points over the 2/3 majority.
Is that what it is?
That would be required to change Illinois' constitution. So, but I agree with Brian. I mean, there's still a lot of money that is going to likely be spent on the opposition side of this. It'll be interesting to see what their negative messaging will be. Likely that the tax would increase this or increase that for homeowners and for taxpayers. But within 5 to 7 percentage points of actually passing that threshold, it'll be interesting to see how much they can knock that number down.
We will see where that goes.
And I just want to clarify, just a point of clarification. There's two ways it can actually pass, Sam. I think you know this. It's either that 3/5 of those voting on
3/5,
3/5 of
still 60%.
60% of those voting on the question itself, or there's that other way that a majority of those who vote in the election. But so this is probably going to be the very first thing that people see when they pull their ballots in November. And so that does, people are maybe likely to vote on it and not just skip over it. Although there is now talk that, in political insider circles about this very politically active labor union that might be trying to get another
Local 150 of the
operating engineers.
Wants a anti-right to work constitutional amendment.
Exactly. And
to make us a union-friendly state in
tied
many ways.
To that.
Right. And does that, apparently the governor is very opposed to this because he doesn't want to muddy the waters.
In other words, the legislature could vote to put a constitutional amendment about that on the ballot as well. The governor clearly, or we've been told, from what I read, Capitol Facts says this a lot, that the governor does not want that on there, as you say, Brian, to get in the way.
Just a very clear choice for voters and not activate, any other opposition.
Because if the graduated income tax does pass, then the governor has said that would bring in more than $3 billion a year in new revenue. He says it would only come from the people who can afford it. Again, people who are opposed say that's not true, or at least over time it'll affect the middle class too. But this is what we're going to hear a lot about on television and radio and in our banner ads on the web.
No doubt.
Don't mean to be too serious about this, but it is a very important issue, coronavirus. And the governor has had various updates, including the latest that some of us saw today, where he had his director of public health and director of emergency ESDA, Emergency Services and Disaster Agency, talking about preparedness. As we do this show, there have been 5 confirmed cases of the virus in the state. 2 people over 70, 2 people or in their 70s, 2 people in their 60s, 1 in their 20s. And the officials and the governor are still saying we're doing everything we can. They talked about how they have been in coordination with local units of government, big cities and counties, and something like 130 or 40 local units of government in contact with the state. Ngozi Ezike, our director of public health, was in Washington to interface with federal officials about this week, and on it goes. It's just we don't know where it's going, but they're trying to show caution, and I don't know how to rate that other than they're there and they're trying.
Yeah, and Director Ezike has really made a concerted effort in these last few weeks to get out in front of the public to say that we are trying to provide the public with as much updated information on this novel coronavirus, COVID-19, as possible. They're, as you mentioned, Bernie, coordinating efforts with Cook County, for example, which has sent employees of its public health department to screen people as they're coming into O'Hare from locations where the virus has been spotted. 5 cases, it's marginally increased as time has gone on, and public health advocates and experts are saying, those numbers will likely increase. There may be, as my colleague here, Brian, had reported, what's called community spread start to happen in Illinois. But
meaning you didn't have to be in China or Italy to get it.
As in you could have just come in contact with somebody who might have come in contact with somebody else. But again, as we've tried to remind people, as public health folks have tried to remind people, the risk to the general public as far as coronavirus goes remains low.
Right. But we've already seen some big changes in Chicago. Like there's one convention that was coming on housewares, I think, at McCormick Place.
I think there was a second one this week.
Yeah, and the second one was only like 5,000 or 6,000 people, but the first one was like 60,000 people expected, and 40,000 hotel rooms that they just canceled because they don't want people coming in from all over the world to this big event.
International
and that's,
show,
That's going to be a hit on all kinds of taxes that are paid to governments in addition to just activity in general in the state.
You think about the far out ramifications. I saw a story in one of the suburban Chicago newspapers about a local charity that sells the used leftover goods from the housewares show is a charitable thing. So there are these ramifications. But I want to get back to this idea of this testing, and I accept what the officials say, that the risk is still low here in Illinois, and I'm not, personally wearing a mask. I am washing my hands, and that's something they say to do a lot. Wash your hands thoroughly, 20 seconds, really get in there in the webbing, under the wedding ring,
and people keep wondering if they should shake hands at the Capitol and other places.
I am trying not to.
One guy did elbow bump me, and I haven't completely stopped myself, but
I'm
you think about
for
it.
the live long and prosper myself, but
can't do that.
The Catholic Church has even said, don't.
That's very good.
Yeah, and the Catholic Church did come out and say that they're,
no handshaking,
implementing a little, for the protocol for the Eucharist and things like that.
Yeah.
So,
but
it's interesting to me. There's 5 cases. 3 of them we know. One was a person who came back from China visiting a sick relative there, and she and her husband contracted it. This latest case was a young man in his 20s who had been to Italy, where we know there's a big outbreak. Cases 3 and 4, it's still a mystery. They traveled to California, where there have been more than 50 cases now and just a death in the last day or so in 12 different counties. And then they came back to Illinois, and the husband, I believe, got sick, and then the spouse got sick as well. And what's not known is whether they were infected here in the community. They were infected in California. And there are only, in Illinois, 2,000. They can only do about 2,000 tests for this. And we're a population of 12 million people, and so there is some, I asked if it was rationing. They use the word triaging of patients. So you have to have somebody who's either really sick and has traveled overseas, or if who's sick and has traveled overseas, they get tested. If you're really sick, and they've ruled out the flu and other things that it could be, then maybe they get kind of bumped up on the list for testing. But if this does start to take off, the state is urging the federal government to provide more of the
reagents.
Reagent, they call it, which is, you imagine on CSI, it's the little thing they drip on there and try and figure out if it's actually the coronavirus that leads to the COVID-19.
There's also, there's a movement just to tell reporters and whatever, and government officials are saying this too. Yes, it's dangerous because I guess while a very less than 1%, close to 0% of flu patients pass away, but it's something like 2% of people who get coronavirus who when
seemingly
it becomes
concentrated
fatal,
for the fatal ones are in people who are in the older or more vulnerable because they already have some other
underlying illnesses,
breathing condition or something like that.
So it's it's clearly not always fatal, but it's obviously dangerous. Nobody wants to get it, and we will keep an eye on that. We'll see where it goes. On to the lighter subjects of like taxes, but there were some Republicans pushing for property tax reduction. They had a press conference this week. The governor has, of course, property taxes are at the local level. The governor says the more we spend on roads and provide local communities with state tax money, the less pressure they have on their own taxpayers. But we don't yet know what will come out of the legislative session, which is supposed to end at the end of May, on property tax reduction, and Republicans say Democrats haven't done enough. So.
I'm not surprised. That's something we've been hearing from Republicans and some Democrats in the suburbs for many years now. There was also a group of Democratic lawmakers who say that, talked about property taxes and the disproportionate impact that it has on lower income communities that they represent. And I think that a lot of the attention for property taxes from certain editorial boards in the state goes to the sort of wealthiest suburban ones that have the highest absolute numbers. If you live in a $1 million house, you're going to have a very high number that you pay on your property taxes. But in fact, in some of the lowest income communities in the Chicago suburbs, they pay a higher rate for their property taxes because the local taxing bodies might not have the wealthy homes or the industry that they can tax. So they, even though it's a smaller absolute number on a $100,000 house, maybe it's a higher percentage. And they say that those people, for people who live in those areas, that's an even greater burden than it is for the wealthy people you often hear about in this issue.
Yeah, I wonder if any thoughts if we're going to get anything to happen this spring?
Well, there's a property tax task force that has been convened to address this issue head on. It's made up of lawmakers, and they're studiously studying this issue. But my colleagues who were reporting on this week had reminded me that the Republicans had brought up this fact that since the 1980s there have been something like 9 property task forces specifically convened to address this issue, and yet nothing substantial has really been done, or at least that's their claim.
Yeah, well, there are like
there are like 80
caps,
but aren't there like 80 members on this latest task force?
Right.
I mean, it's almost
I think everybody got on it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So then it does raise the question, and I think Republicans have been asking this: is this really about constructively finding solutions for this, or is this about being able to say, I was on the property tax relief task force on your campaign mailers? The problem with this is that there's a fixed amount of things you can do that don't involve more tax money, right? And we saw Governor Rauner campaign for 4 years on trying to do some of those things, and we still hear the conservative think tank, the Illinois Policy Institute, advocating for those ideas now, but they involve weakening the union rights of teachers in school districts around the state. And Democrats rejected that, and there was an epic war in Springfield over that issue, and it just didn't happen. And so if you can't bring the costs down that way in local school districts, the money is going to have to come from somewhere, and that would mean more money from the state for going to local schools for education. And I don't see a lot of people who advocate for lower property taxes at the local level also advocating for higher state taxes at the same time.
And in a similar just issue of local need for money, the Illinois Municipal League put out a list of wants for the cities and villages all over the state this week, and one of those is to get more of the state income tax back, because when the state income tax was instituted, or over early years, local governments got 10% of that money. Now they get, of the individual tax, it's less than 6%, and they are saying they want more, but again, that would cost the state more money, and over time, things have moved, so that's, I don't know if it's, I don't know if I want to predict, but it's a difficult ask because if you're taking more money from the state that is strapped and has still billions of dollars in backlog, it's going to be difficult to accomplish.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm speaking off the top of my head here, but the state has been doing what's called prorating. They only give 95% of the money that they're going to give to cities than they might in a normal year. And I think it's one of the governor's sort of Damocles things passed by graduated income tax that he would hold back even more money
I
from
think
local
they get
governments.
like 5% or not, depending on if the
including money for schools.
Graduated income tax passes. So yeah, we'll see where that goes. And I guess we'll end on Rod Blagojevich. The Attorney Registration Disciplinary Commission has recommended that he be disbarred. I think the Supreme Court takes final action. Former Governor Blagojevich, recently out of prison, still a convicted felon, did not contest that, but he is on Cameo and selling greetings, which I guess is a service where you can have him go on video and say happy birthday or good luck in the election to your friend for a fee. I guess it was $65 in one case, where one Republican activist in Champaign purchased a Blagojevich Cameo video for one Democratic candidate against another for county board.
Blagojevich doesn't seem to be contesting his disbarment, and it just reminded me that 13 years ago, when he was still governor, he went to visit the Illinois Supreme Court, had breakfast, because the justices actually stay in the building there on court days. And when he came out, he said, when I'm not governor, I'm a practicing lawyer. I spent a lot of time in courts like traffic court and branch court. Never had any hope of getting into that court. And he said, for me as a lawyer to get into the Supreme Court, I had to get elected governor. So I don't think there's any danger of him returning to the Supreme Court.
We're going to have to end on that. I appreciate it. Sam Dunklau, thank you. Brian Mackey, thank you. I'm Bernie Schoenburg. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.